Hi, my name is Brett Hoffman. I am going to be explaining my Sprite Mover project in Unity for the Game Programming 104 class. We're going to go ahead and start off by just explaining what the game is and what you can do in it, and then go a little bit more in depth in the code that was used to make the game. So for starters, we have here our starship as shown in the sprites, as well as 4 scripts that allow the game to run, including a script for the frame rate, as well as a script that manages the game itself. If we go ahead and click play here in Unity, you'll see that it just brings us to a completely blue background. Using the arrow keys, I can move this sprite around. If I hold down Shift and attempt to move the sprite, it will only move a single unit at a time. And something of my own addition, if you hold Control and move the ship around, it will go at 3 times the normal movement speed. So if we go immediately into the programming behind it, we'll go ahead and start with the frame rate setter. You can see that here we have a very simple setup of code that gives us no VSync and locks the frame rate to 60. Moving down to Game Manager, this is where a lot of the input comes in for the very basic abilities that the player has, including the ability to disable the component and deactivate the game object entirely. This is disabling the movement component, mind you, as well as the ability to exit the application when it is built entirely. Moving back to our game, it is a lot easier to show this now that it is better explained, but when I am in here and press P, I can no longer move at all despite pressing the arrow keys that are normally built for movement. Pressing P again unlocks that restriction. And then if I press Q, the entire starship disappears from both our scene and the asset bar over here. Bringing it back with Q allows us to control the program as normal. Moving back into our scripts, we have the sprite changer code, which is just a lot of code that is built to change the color of our sprites, as well as render the sprite in the first place. A lot of this stuff was mostly practice and is not directly used in the code as it is seen in the game. And then lastly, and most importantly, we have the Sprite Move class. In this class, we have a base move speed that can be edited by changing the number here. We keep it to 0.1f for the sake of demonstration. And then underneath the void update tree here, we have a check to see if the player has pressed the spacebar, which will transform the sprite on the screen so that it is directly in the center one time every time that the spacebar is pressed. Moving on a little bit, we have the first set of input codes that first determines if left shift is being pressed, and if it does, it will use a get key down version of our movement code, which prevents the ship from moving more than 1 unit at a time. If it does not detect that the shift key is pressed, it will then check to see if the control key is pressed. So that way shift takes precedence over the control, and if the control key is being pressed, it will take our normal movement script and set it so that way it is moving at 3 times the normal value, which is why it appears to speed up when you hold control. And then lastly, if it can detect that neither of these keys are being pressed, it will run the normal movement script in which whenever the player presses an arrow, it will cause the sprite to move in that direction. This movement is not restricted to the cardinals. If you put in both say, the up arrow and the right arrow, it will move at a diagonal since it is allowed to run both of these ifs at the same time. But that is all that I have to present. Thank you.